This shirt has been missing for like a year, but I'm glad I finally found it because today we are ranking the albums of Behemoth through Opvs Contra Natvram. And we're doing no more than 3 per tier, so keep that in mind when you see me put things in areas you wouldn't. It's all subjective anyways, but let's start from the beginning with Sventevith, Storming Near the Baltic in 1995. So for those only aware of Behemoth's sort of mainline discography, so to speak, they started out as a pretty straightforward black metal band. Just pure kind of second wave style traditional black metal in the same vein of bands like Immortal or Enslaved. It's actually pretty decent for what it is, but it's also not really what I come to the band for. If I'm in the mood for this style, I'm much more likely to reach for one of the Scandinavian classics. I do like the spooky synths and the atmosphere, but when weighed against everything else that's to come, I have to rank it near the bottom, so it's going to D tier. Just remember, again, this is all entirely relative to their own albums and, as always, just based on my opinion. Something has to be at the bottom. They followed that up with Grom in 1996, another pretty traditional black metal album. It's definitely more aggressive feeling and a little bit thrashier in places too, in that kind of Bathory style, but also with some folky elements. Again, not bad, and I actually enjoy the opener. There's a lot of different elements on it that I enjoy as just a second wave black metal album again, and it's definitely interesting to hear their early roots. I do think it's a slight improvement. Gonna put this one at C tier. Moving on to Pandemonic Incantations in 1998. So they're transitioning into much more of their kind of familiar blackened death metal territory at this point. Still kind of transitional with a lot of the lingering black metal elements, but Nurgle actually starting to sound more like himself on this one. Great intro with all those deeper, deathier vocals, and again moving into more aggressive songwriting. Pretty solid, but still a shadow of how much they will only mature from here. So another one putting slightly higher up on C tier. Then we get Satanica in 1999. So this is one of the earliest albums that I heard from the band, and I still enjoy going back to it semi-frequently. And by the way, I do always re-listen to all the albums again every time I redo these lists. And to me, this is where Behemoth truly become Behemoth, with more of that death metal style and production. It's still raw, but it feels more like the classic death metal albums from that time and fully shifting away from the black metal stuff. That said, it's definitely a little messy and inconsistent, but there are some really great tracks to find, like Lamb, Ceremony of Shiva, and Decade of Therion, that are still among my favorites. Still great to listen to this day. I'm putting it at B tier. Next up is Dilemma 6 in 2000. So kind of a controversial opinion amongst fans here, but I think this album is a bit overrated.
How dare you!
I know a lot of people who even consider this to be their favorite Behemoth record, and as always, I respect you for your opinion, but I just don't really agree. That said, it has grown on me a lot over the years, like even since the last time I did this tier list, and I still think it's very good, but I also think it just has some dead time on it. I'll give you that it has classics on here like Christians to the Lions, which is clearly one of their most famous songs and a mainstay for live performances. Behold, bastard son, I am the evil one. I also enjoy Virum Sabati, 23, the Youth Manifesto, and Anti-Christian Phenomenon. I just don't seem to get quite the same thrill as others do when listening to it start to finish, although on this most recent re-listen I was again enjoying it quite a bit more. Last time I actually went so far as to put this one at D, but this time I'm moving it up quite a bit. I'm feeling a B tier for this one as well. Next up, Zos Kia Cultus, Here and Beyond in 2003. Now on the flip side of that last one, I think that this is Behemoth's first truly great album. Definitely one of my all-time favorites from them, especially from this earlier era of their sound. I think I felt the same way a lot of the Thelema fans out there probably do when watching my videos that I did when watching the Cover Killer Nation ranking, where he put this one almost dead last, which I just think is criminal. I mean, for one, you've got As Above, So Below with that fantastic groovy guitar hook. You've got the Harlot of the Saints, Blackest of the Black, No Sympathy for Fools with that killer combination of endless double bass with start-stop guitar, and then of course, the title track. Very fun, very consistent, their first great start-to-finish listen, in my opinion. I could put this one at S, and I think I did last time, but I'm limiting myself to just 2 for that one, so I'm putting it at A tier. Then there's the mighty Demigod in 2004. So before The Satanist, this was probably the most commonly listed favorite Behemoth album I saw amongst fans. It's also probably their heaviest and most brutal to date, with more banger tracks like Towards Babylon, Zool, Slave Shall Serve, and Conquer All. Nurgle sounds absolutely demonic, and the guitars are insanely evil, even with the little touches of acoustic. Another front-to-back incredible album, and I'm kind of embarrassed to say that at first I didn't really get it, but it's just like so dense and berating and at 11 all the time that I think it was hard for me to sort of like pick out all the great little moments, but the more you listen to it, just the better it gets. They're moving into slightly more modern production here too, but without losing any of the rawness and heaviness, they absolutely make up for all of that with just pure primal bloodlust. Another one, I put at S tier last time, but again, I limited myself, I challenged myself, and on this latest re-listen, it was kind of interesting because there are 2 albums I go back and forth with, and this one actually didn't win out this time. So I'm putting it high up on A tier. Not quite at S tier, but again, sometimes it bumps up there depending on the day. Next is the Apostasy in 2007. So this is another really interesting album with kind of a unique sound and lots of great textures. It starts off super atmospheric with that Rome 64 CE intro really setting the stage before going into Slaying the Prophets of Iza with those weird guitars that sound unlike any other song I've heard. And really, there are lots of cool moments in general on this album, like that eerie rolling acoustic guitar on At the Left Hand of God and the absolutely punishing blast beats of Arcana Heretique. Libertheme is one of my all-time favorites, with that constantly spiraling guitar hook seeming to tunnel into the very depths of hell. Christ-grinding Avenue, true to its name, really does grind you to dust alongside the blackened guitar tremolos and subtle blasts of brass instruments. And Inner Sanctum is also pretty interesting with its slower, more dramatic style, sounding more like something off of like a Dimmu Borgir album, though it actually features Worrell Dane of Nevermore. Maybe not as tightly packed of a punch as Demigod, but still a really great and I think underrated album, and I also think that that Kali statue on the cover really captures the sort of warlike ancient vibes of the atmosphere. So this is another one that moved up from last time. I had it in B tier. I'm actually putting it right alongside the other A tiers. Then it's time for Evangelion in 2009. So this one marks what I would call kind of the third major transitional era of their sound, less blunt force brutality in favor of a slightly more melodic and atmospheric approach. Nurgle moving from the death metal grunts to more of a naturalistic snarl. Of Fire in the Void, Total Invasion, and Alas, Lord is Upon Me are probably my overall favorites on this one, alluding to the big dramatic sound of the next record. But we also still have some of the more bludgeoning leftover Demigod vibes on the likes of Shemhamforash, however you pronounce that, Daemonos, and Transmigrating Beyond Realms of Amenti. So great balance here of more brooding melodic material mixed with the more dragged across concrete kind of sound. And really, there's not a single bad track on here. In fact, they're all fantastic, and it makes for a great double feature with, again, the album we're about to get to. So yeah, this and Demigod are the ones that tend to kind of go head to head every time I re-listened to the discography, and believe it or not, Evangelion took the gold this time. I'm putting it at S tier. And then, as we've been alluding to, it's time for The Satanist in 2014.
Just hook it to my veins!
God, I can't believe it's been almost a decade since this thing came out. That's ridiculous. Now, it almost seems redundant to talk about this record at this point because every reviewer, including myself, has already kind of talked it to death. It made so many best of the decade lists, including my own, even at number 1 in many cases. But in short, I do still believe that this is Behemoth's greatest and most important album to date. Some would disagree with that and call it overrated, and that's fine, but for me, so many just instant classics classics on this one, like Blow Your Trumpets Gabriel, which I still find completely entrancing with that hypnotic, repetitive guitar riff along with the haunting black and white music video. Still gets me to this day. Then you've also got Messe Noir, Ora Pro Nobis Lucifer, The Satanist, Furor Divinus, and the amazing closer, O Father, O Satan, O Son. Amazing riffs and also more of a kind of dramatic sort of stage performance vibe to the vocals here. Absolute masterpiece. Of course, it's going to the top of S tier. Now that is a tough act to follow, and unfortunately, they followed that up with I Loved You at Your Darkest in 2018.
Disappointed!
So, coming off of that high, this was a massive disappointment to me right off the bat. I'm just gonna say it. Like, one of the biggest letdowns I've ever had with a new album. I didn't like it at all when it came out, but I always, again, re-listen to the albums in preparation for these lists, and sometimes my opinions do change, as a few did, as you saw. But I gotta say, I still don't like it now. And it definitely steps over the line into cringe territory, too. Like, right from the start, I hate those little child vocals in the intro with the Jesus Christ, I shall not forgive.
Cringe.
I think they're going for this, like, haunting and eerie vibe, but it's just very lame and Hot Topic, in my opinion, and it just sets the tone for everything else. Now, as always, to be fair, there are some decent moments, too, like Ecclesia Diabolica Catholica, God Equals Dog, with some nice riffs despite that really try-hard title. If Crucifixion Was Not Enough has that cheat code punk drumming that I love. And really, speaking of which, if I were to highlight one performance on here, it would be Inferno's work on the kit. Sabbat Mater being another highlight in this realm.
Come to be despised, for I'm Aurora's son.
But otherwise, this album just does so little for me, and even the better parts aren't all that memorable. It feels like a cheap assembly line imitation of what came before. I'm actually lowering my grade on this one, as it's the only album that I actually get irritated with when listening. It is my least favorite at D tier. And that brings us to Opvs Contra Natvram in 2022. The title Latin for roughly Work Against Nature. Post-God Nirvana sets us up with some great atmosphere with the pounding drums, clanking steel, and throat singing. High-lung vibes even on this one. Honestly, I feel like this should have been the first single, because sure, it acts as more of an intro, but from the creepy Bioshock strings to Nurgle's unhinged prophesizing, it's pretty glorious to behold. Malaria Vulgata is mostly a frenzy of blast beats and simple chord progressions, not particularly memorable, but the bass guitar and echoing tom fills are a highlight. Similar notes for the almost groovy Neo Spartacus, further solidifying those instruments as my favorite part of the album once more. Better song too, I would say. I really like that one. The Deathless Sun is a solid single with its unnerving Hollywood quality music video, but even without that, I enjoy the subtle chorals on the I am nothing, I am no one chorus. Pretty catchy and ripe for audience participation. This is followed by Of My Herculean Exile, which also comes complete with a big budget short film, this time seemingly about vampires. The song itself is decent, going for more of a spooky, atmospheric, slow burn. I do wish it had more of a satisfying conclusion rather than sort of fizzling out, but within the context of the album, it works pretty well. Disinheritance throws another curveball with the piano in the intro and interlude, but similarly, I wish that they would commit more to completely integrating this into the song rather than as just sort of like a extra dash of spice on an otherwise somewhat bland dish. Solid closing moments, though. Off to War has a good mix of atmosphere alongside an always headbang-inducing D-beat. I don't remember being initially floored by this one when it dropped, but it's seriously grown on me with its more dynamic songwriting and ripping solo. This would honestly fit right on Evangelion or The Satanist. Really, my biggest disappointment on this album is the continued lack of truly memorable guitar riffs, but Once Upon a Pale Horse at least somewhat scratches that itch with its kind of Opeth-y strumming patterns. Die Becoming Eternal feels a little bit out of place for some reason. Not sure if it was just my copy, but the production and mixing feels slightly different. Maybe it's just me, I don't know, let me know down in the comments, but pretty cool song though once you get into it with the more pungent, demonic atmosphere. And then Versus Christus further feeds off of that vibe for a pretty powerful conclusion, even incorporating some eerie cleans as it builds into a full-on satanic hymn. This is what I was talking about when I said I wanted the piano to play a more central role in the song itself. So yeah, I went into this thing with pretty low expectations after that last one, but honestly...
Hey, that's pretty good.
It's not their best work, but I'd call it at least a much more fitting follow-up to The Satanist, and I am putting it at B tier. Check out this playlist for plenty more death metal tier lists, and let me know down in the comments again, how would you rank these albums? Let's have a conversation. But that'll do it for now. Flight of Icarus signing off. I will see you in the trenches.